In 1938, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman, and with him, the superhero genre was born and the comic book industry was kickstarted. Now, I've been a fan of superheroes my whole life, but it wasn't until 1991, when Jim Lee and Chris Claremont relaunched X-Men, that I became obsessed. And while my obsession has dwindled over the years, this new series from the Pop Culture Bombcast is my way of reconnecting to what made me love comics so much in the first place. And I've brought my co-host and good friend Bender, who reconnected with his love of comics through our friendship more than 10 years ago. So join us as we break down the best of what each year in comic book history had to offer, as we give you That Year in Comics. Hey, and with that, welcome to the first episode of our new monthly series, That Year in Comics, 1986.
Bum, bum, bum.
Like the intro said, we're just going to be breaking down key comics from each year, mainly the what and why we liked what comics of that year and what made that year so great.
Yeah.
And essentially, even more so than that, all I want to accomplish is remind myself what made me love comics, especially not this Jeremy, but the Jeremy that was like 20 or like 17 to 20 that really went back and found all those great years of comics. That really, the nostalgia factor that made me feel like I was a part of something at the time, going to my comic store every week.
Yeah, I got to say, diving into this and going back and reading the couple that I read and catching up on the synopsises that I read, I want to go back and read more stuff from back then.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what years we pick going forward. I've even toyed with the idea, like I told you, to go through and kind of come up with some ideas.
You haven't done that yet, but I will.
Well, that's okay. I did three. I got three. So we'll either hash that out at the end of this, or maybe after the first couple episodes, we'll put 2 or 3 options up and let people vote on them on Twitter or what have you.
Yeah, and I got a couple ideas of stuff that I know I have at home, but I wanted to dive back in and look at some of the stuff that I followed for 2 or 3 episodes as like a 9 or 10-year-old, or issues, not episodes, and then fell off or didn't catch the issue 67 out of a 5-part series or something, like the 4th issue or whatever.
Right.
So,
well, all that said, we are going to doing, like I said, we're doing 1986 this time, and the first thing I'm going to do every episode is I'm going to kind of catch you up on what was going on in 1986 in general.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
We'll see if we got some crossover. So let's start with general. I've broke it down in general, music, and movies.
Oh, see, I went world events.
Well, world events kind of covers general for me. So, for instance, 1986, Halley's Comet passed.
Oh, yeah.
Space Shuttle Challenger met its untimely and tragic demise.
Yep.
Chernobyl had a meltdown.
It did. I have that.
Pre-cannibal Mike Tyson won his first heavyweight title.
Yeah.
Bill Buckner, the most hated man in New England, let a ball go through his legs in the World Series.
Okay.
And then the last thing I put, and I think this was pretty big, especially kind of fits into our whole Pop Culture Bombcast, Pixar was purchased by Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which launched what it ended up being today.
So I went in 1986. I had the Challenger and I had Chernobyl, but I also said because these comics, and we'll get into it more, are a little darker this year.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that right out the gate.
I said that it was Reagan and Gorbachev sat down and talked about nuclear disarmament between Russia and the United States, and I feel like that probably played a little bit of a role in.
The world was definitely changing.
Series. Yeah, some of the other things I picked up through the 80s was there was a lot of assassinations and assassination attempts.
Yeah.
So Ronald Reagan had an assassination attempt on him. John Lennon was murdered in 1980.
Yeah, but see, we're on 86, John.
I know, but these are the things that inspire people to write.
But you got to stick to 1986.
No, you don't.
So here's what happened in music. Falco's Rock Me Amadeus was number 1 song. Madonna's Papa Don't Preach. Europe came out with The Final Countdown.
Oh, my God.
Metallica's Master of Puppets debuted.
Really?
And one of the cool videos of the year that was also a change in music was the release of Walk This Way by Run DMC and Aerosmith.
Yeah, I saw that too. That was the first rap and rock crossover.
Collaboration, yeah. So movies. So the flop, if she was here, she'd be happy in this. Her favorite, Top Gun. Bill Paxton told us it was game over when fighting aliens in the Alien sequel.
Yeah.
Star Trek, they traveled back home in Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. Highlander became the only one important movie for me that year. That was my favorite.
That was it?
Highlander, man. I loved that movie. Hoosiers, not the St. Louis kind, but the actual basketball kind that it's based on. Bowie chewed up scenery like a savage in Labyrinth. Magic dance. And then another big one for me was the Transformers, the movie. The good one, the animated film in theaters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a big year for 1986 in film.
I was 2 in 1986.
My dad took me to the theater to see it. I was 9. So
yeah.
What else you have before we jump in?
Well, like I said, I did things that I thought were inspiring to the writers of the books that we were
that might have had
today.
influence.
So some things that went on leading up to 86, like I said, Reagan, assassination attempt. The Pope, there was an assassination attempt on
If we're going to
John
get through
Paul
these,
II.
you're going to have to be able to talk.
I know, man. I don't know what's going on.
You've only had half a beer.
Iran-Contra.
Yep.
Was a huge deal. FBI, John Gotti became the leader of the New York Mafia after taking out 2 other mafia
That definitely had to have some influence on Frank Miller. So, All right, what else?
The Star Wars defense from Reagan.
Oh yeah, aptly named Star Wars.
So those are the big ones that I thought, like reading these.
We're going to get you to focus on the years.
Yeah, I mean I will. But
I get what you're doing.
Those are the things I thought that would inspire the writers.
To your point, this is what most people consider the biggest year in the history of comics.
Yeah, the best quote I read last night was, "This is the year that comic books grew up."
Yeah, so they very much matured. At the very least, it's the year that caused the industry to go mainstream. Comics weren't just the thing that the geek kids, that people were starting to take note.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about a couple of reasons. I think it's you could also call this maybe the year of the M squared, Miller and Moore.
Yeah.
Because this is what propelled them into legends, and we'll get into that. But one of the other big reasons, the way we say mainstream taking note, because a couple of comics from this year and during the time period, people started to give them praise for their complex stories, for their edgier tone, and, even the greatest English language books of all time. 2 of the comics we're going to talk about are in it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So we're going to get into that. First off, when I say Miller and Moore, of course I'm talking about primarily Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. But I think they overshadow a little bit Miller's run on Daredevil, his return to Daredevil, which we'll start with. But I'm going to go into another thing that shouldn't be overlooked. Alan Moore also wrote arguably the single best Superman story in a lot of people's minds. It was Whatever Happened to Man of Tomorrow.
Yes.
And that took place between Superman 423 and Action Comics 583. 2-part story. I've got the hardcover that collects it. Essentially, it was the goodbye to the Silver Age. It was an epilogue to Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yes.
That was what it was about. But it wrapped...
I didn't realize that was so 32 years ago.
Forever ago. What it did is it crushed that very convoluted multiverse that DC had going. It was the table setter for the six-issue miniseries that John Byrne ended up releasing, which is more or less the definitive Man of Steel that for most of your life before they've effed it up over the last few years. Because as much as I was a fan of the Hulk, it was the Man of Steel miniseries and Superman of that period. That's what got me into collecting comics, was Superman.
Oh, really?
Oh, it
See,
was.
I've always thought that Superman was just too perfect. He was the kind of the boring square character, and it was Batman and Spider-Man were the ones that, and still today, are my favorite superheroes.
And then there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I get it. When people say I love Superman, I totally understand it. It just, to me, it wasn't, he didn't hold my attention as well as the other guys.
We're talking about a weekend trip down to Metropolis.
Yeah.
And the Superman 40th anniversary of Superman Festival is coming up here this year, too.
Oh, really?
So I'd like to go see that.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Also, by the way, if you've never read it, it's a good book. It is a very good book, but there is a tear-jerking moment where Krypto sacrifices himself by
the dog?
Yeah, by attacking the Kryptonite man who's about to kill Superman, and Krypto attacks him and chews him up and kills him, but kills himself because of the Kryptonite radiation.
Oh, yeah.
So he sacrifices himself for
that's
Superman.
Terrible.
It's a good moment.
I know. It just makes I don't want to read that.
But it's very symbolic because it was a Silver Age book, which are all butterflies and ribbons.
Yep.
And here's this bringing an end of the Silver Age, creating what is the modern age, and the Dark Age, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's kind of capped off by this dog dying.
Yeah.
Something you would have never seen in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that said, let's get into a couple of debuting. Here's some things I wrote down on why 1986 is so big. Also, so we had Dark Horse Comics open up its doors.
Yeah.
First big character was Concrete, and of course later they would go on to Hellboy.
Yeah.
You had Slave Labor Graphics, which was two of their bigger books, Milk and Cheese, and then for a long time, especially when I just worked at a comic book store, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac was one of their big characters.
Yeah, I was reading last night. I wasn't too familiar with these early releases of theirs, but they were mostly like satire on already popular characters out there.
Things like that, yeah.
They had things like, I think it was like what's the bear that they have? Some angry bear who kills the mutant ninjas or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny.
When I was just a lowly comic book store employee, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, people were always looking for back issues of that book. He was big. You know the kids that had Invader Zim and stuff like that?
Yeah.
That was the crowd that was getting into comics, and that was the comic that was really popular for him.
Okay.
We also had Malibu Comics start in 1986. Most notable titles, X-Mutants, Ultra Force, and Prime. They created the Ultraverse. And they also had the Eternity imprint, which was famous because that was the first place that Evil Ernie and Chaos Comics spun out of. And maybe the biggest contribution that Malibu ever did was they were the publisher of record, and they were the people fitting the bill for producing the books that later became Image Comics.
Oh.
So if you look on the first year of Image Comics, on the inside, it says Malibu Comics on the inside cover.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so they were purchased early November, I think, in 92. So,
Yeah, I think Image...
Or
that's
90 something.
I think Image came out in 92.
Yeah, 92 is when Image came out. But Malibu, I think, was... After the Image split back and went on their own, Marvel swooped in and bought Malibu.
Okay.
And essentially killed the universe. They tried to print some stuff here and there, but no Malibu characters right now are seen print.
Yeah.
And there were some good ones. Malibu was good for a while.
See, I'm not familiar with those guys.
And you'd be hard pressed to find them because
Yeah.
you'd have to raid $1 or 25-cent bins.
Oh, really?
And there was a time where a couple of the books were pretty popular, but nothing to worth talk about on here. But definitely, it was something else, and they were shiny and new for a bit, and then they just disappeared, like a lot of people. Some other notable firsts. So comics and miniseries. So Marvel put out Punisher's first miniseries, which was 5 issues of 4, and I say that because 4 of the books had a miniseries of 4 on it, even though it went to 5. Only one of the books had it right on the top.
Was it misprint?
Yeah, it was misprint on all the covers. This was pitched years earlier, but to what you were talking about, everybody's going to think about Daredevil and Batman, but it was never greenlit before because they figured he was too dark, gritty, and someone that killed like he did didn't need to be in comics. Well, here we're starting to change, and Punisher got his own miniseries. And in the book, if you've never read it, I haven't read it in a long time. I had to refresh my memory on it. The final of one of the final pages of the book, after Punisher helps out this girl, she says, "Well, what do you need?" She goes, "Anything you want of me, I will pay back." And the next panel is him leaving a bed, and she's laying in it.
Oh,
yeah, a little
that's
black eye for the Punisher.
Yeah,
but that was different time, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
Elektra and Assassin miniseries. Elektra Assassin.
Yeah.
So Bill Sienkiewicz and Frank Miller again.
Yep,
that was a big one.
That was one of the ones after I was done with this I want to go back and read.
It's if you're not a fan of Sienkiewicz's art, or if you don't know him well, it's going to be tough because he's really got a really psychedelic style. But it was a big book. It was a book I think that throughout history has ebbed and flowed on how popular it was. But it's Frank Miller, so it's worth it.
You got to check it out. So
G.I. Joe's and Master of the Universe got their own comic books.
Yeah, I saw that.
In '86. Which, those who haven't yet, if you want to hear more history about those, we won't get into them. But go watch Netflix's The Toys That Made Us. 4-issue miniseries. All 4 episodes are worth watching.
Really? I watched the Star Wars one. I haven't gone back and watched it.
Missy watched them. She enjoyed them that much. And the Masters of the Universe one's the best because those guys are nuts. All of them want to take credit for what they did, and all of them have got huge personalities. X Factor, maybe one of the bigger books that come out of '86 for Marvel, spun out of the Avengers 263 and Fantastic Four 286, And eventually it tied into the Mutant Massacre, which was important because that's the first time in comics people think of the history between Wolverine and Sabretooth. Mm-hmm. That's the first time they ever fought in the comics was in 1980 in the Mutant Massacre that started in 86.
Because their battle was huge in the 90s.
Yeah, every other week. You could just books,
back and forth.
Our books lagging. Well, let's put them in there.
Yeah.
All right. DC came out with Blue Beetle. An old Gold Key comic. I think it was Gold Key. I can't remember who made it.
I think Booster Gold was this
first
year.
appearance. That was his first appearance and his book. And Hawkman saw a series. Other publishers, like we said, Dark Horse came out with Concrete. Next Men, all of these appeared in Dark Horse Comics Presents. Next Men famously later with Next Men's essentially was John Byrne's take on Fantastic Four.
Yep.
But the big thing that they gave us was a backstory in, I think it was issue 23 of Hellboy. His first, That was his first appearance. Sin City came out with Dark Horse Presents. Alien and Predator saw their first, and Buffy the Vampire saw its first, all in Dark Horse Presents, which started in '86.
Oh, okay.
Those characters didn't, but it gave us all those.
Buffy's been around since '86.
No, other notable first appearances: Kilowog, and the first use of the term Green Lantern Corps.
Yes, I saw that. I wrote down that Marvel did its first universe spinoff with the Marvel New Universe.
Well, we can go ahead and say it now. Not all was peaches and cream in 1986. The Marvel New Universe started, and it was awful.
Yeah, apparently it was basically a terrible joke. I had never heard of any of these characters, like the DP7 Force, which is basically a paranormal Justice League style force. Yeah. Kickers Inc. Kickers Inc. is a group of heroes for hire, all former football players led by Jack Conte.
So I had that comic book when I was a kid.
It just sounds fucking so 80s, man.
Yeah. Also, by the way, awful film villain, but still the mega bad in the X-Men, Apocalypse.
Yeah.
In 86. Eddie Brock, a pretty big one, about to be portrayed by lovely Tom Hardy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so curious if that's going to be good.
I need to see more than the teaser.
Yeah.
Captain America Light, or as he was referred to in 86, is U.S. Agent.
Oh.
And then Amanda Waller, which is, for a long time, didn't really make sense, but she was the organizer of the Suicide Squad, even in the movie.
Yes.
She's got a lot more play in cartoons and in the comics of late.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty big. But before we jump into the three main things we're going to talk about this year, anything else you got to add before?
No, I think that was. I think we hit almost everything. We must have searched the same sites.
I searched a bunch. I'll credit them here at the end. So first off, we're going to start with Daredevil, and the reason we're starting with Daredevil is one, it was probably the one I was the least familiar with. I had read it before.
Yeah, I had never read it. It was always on my list of things to go back and read, but I had never gotten around to it. And I'm really glad we decided to do this because I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, so those that don't know, Daredevil, and essentially what we're talking about is Born Again. That run that was written by Frank Miller with art by Dave Mazzucchelli. Frank was called by Marvel editor-in-chief Ralph Macchio, not the Karate Kid one. And
that'd have been cool if it was, though. And
asked to see if he was interested in returning to Daredevil because he saved Daredevil from the brink of cancellation. Mm-hmm. Daredevil started, I believe, in the late 60s, 70s. And
yeah, I think it was 67.
67 sounds right. And it ran up until it almost died. Frank Miller's take on it saved it. He agreed under one condition, and that was that Mazzucchelli would return and draw all the full scripts. Now, there's a rumor, there's an urban legend, that Mazzucchelli was so hamstrung and handcuffed by Marvel that they wanted him to just do pencils over Frank Miller's layouts.
Yeah, I read that too.
But not true. Frank Miller to this day denies that, and both Mazzucchelli said, no, I had full reign over it.
And if you look at the, if you compare some of Frank Miller's artwork to his, it's very 80s, but it's different. It's very different.
It's not a stretch, but Frank Miller is definitely more distinct. Well, Mazzucchelli's art's beautiful. I mean, if you've never read some of his Batman stuff, his Daredevil stuff, it's beautiful. But Frank Miller is unique than what he does. I mean, Frank Miller is always, forever now, going to be associated with the way Sin City looks.
Yeah, large-breasted women, muscular men, and lots of shadows.
So here's what's the nuts and bolts of what Daredevil Born Again was. So Frank Miller comes back to it. He starts writing, and he instantly everybody thinks of Spider-Man as being the hard luck hero, but let's just run down some of the stuff that happens. His heroin-addicted ex-girlfriend, Karen Page, sells his secrets to a drug lord who later moves it up the chain to Kingpin. So Kingpin decides to ruin his life, and he gets the IRS to freeze his accounts, bank to foreclose on his apartment, gets a dirty cop to witness, a cop that he turns dirty and make him
has him disbarred.
Well, yeah, he says that he witnessed him pay a witness to perjure himself. Yeah. And all of this happens, and his current girlfriend just happens to break up with him.
Yeah.
Maybe the worst run of any superhero.
The first 2 issues that I read, I was like right out of the gate, you see Karen Page just strung out on heroin, selling his secrets, like page 1, and I'm like, this is a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah, and, so he pulls himself up by his bootstraps.
Yeah.
And goes and faces the Kingpin, only to get the living shit kicked out of him.
And he's like losing it. He's paranoid. He thinks everybody's out to get him.
And you can't blame him. He starts losing his mind. Yeah. So the Kingpin beats the dog shit out of him, throws him in a stolen cab, douses him with whiskey, and pushes him into the river.
Yeah.
He escapes. And, this is comic book, so it's not
absolutely.
He stumbles back to the gym where his dad was battling Jack Murdock.
That's crazy.
And his mom, a nun who he had not seen in years.
Well, he thought she was dead.
Comes to his rescue to nurse him back to health. Now, you would think, that's a good story.
Yeah, very heartwarming. The end.
Just getting started. So while he's nursed back to health and while he's getting his feet back under him, the aforementioned crack whore comes back, Karen, who by this point literally is selling herself.
Yeah, she is selling herself for a ride across the country back to New York City.
Yeah.
With a Mexican drug lord name. I forget his name. I didn't write his name down.
Yeah, not going to talk about him anymore. Yeah. Foggy tries to help her. Moves her back into his house.
We're not mentioning, though, that Foggy's actually banging Matt Murdock's ex-girlfriend that dumped him via tape recording that he has to listen to.
Well, he's no longer working law, and Foggy still has his license. So, so Foggy tries to help, and this draws the attention to draw out Daredevil of Kingpin, and he sends hitmen to shoot up the place.
Yeah, he sends a guy that he hires from a...
Not Nuke. He's a little bit later.
No. The guy that he gets out of the insane asylum to dress like Daredevil.
The imposter Daredevil.
Yeah, and to take him out. And, Matt Murdock gets his shit together and saves the day. So then Kingpin flips it and goes after Ben Urich. I always want to put it on there. Urich. And he's trying to clear Matt Murdock's name. So Kingpin goes after him, tries to take him out. And they hire this is very Frank Miller, too, with the gigantic nurse who, basically strangles the cop in the parking lot. Yeah. But this does, though, forces Matt to become Daredevil again. Yeah.
So he stops the imposter Daredevil.
Yep.
Which makes Karen confess what she did.
Yep.
Which... Because Matt has turned full on hippie, no longer needs worldly possessions.
Yeah, no. He's a Catholic. He's a good Catholic, and he forgives her for ruining his life.
Well, and then they move into a dilapidated apartment.
Yeah.
Just a rundown shithole. And he starts taking a job as a short order chef.
Yeah.
Still not the end of the story.
Yeah, which, if you got heightened senses, I think you would want to take a job where there was less...
Smells?
Yeah. I feel like you'd be overrun all the time.
Matt, did you hear that? I'm sorry, I'm too busy. My sense of grease smell is overpowering all my other magnificent senses.
Like he smells Foggy coming. I'm like, get the hell out of here. All you're smelling is onions and raw meat.
Yeah, that's not Foggy. Maybe he did that because it did remind him of the Kingpin. Because come on, Kingpin's fat as fuck.
Yeah, and so is Foggy.
Yeah, so. Foggy, he's pudgy here. He's pudgy here and there. He's fatter at times in life.
Yeah, he's like a real life dude. He gains a little, loses a little.
That's right. So Kingpin, obsessed with Murdock, enlists Nuke to come and to just start shooting shit up.
Yeah, he's basically Captain America light. He has to take pills, red, blues, and greens. The reds obviously make him mad. Or red, blues, and whites. And he's got an American flag tattooed across his face.
Which draws the attention of the Avengers, and namely Captain America, because you're not going to mess with trademark infringement with Cap on the scene.
Absolutely.
So, of course, Cap shows up to look. And eventually the good guys do win, and none of the bad guys really die, even though we think Nuke is going to die.
He doesn't die?
No, Cap takes him away, and he shows up years later in Punisher.
See, I thought he died there on the table when he confessed to all of him and the other hitman confessed to the, but I don't know, it's kind of left wide open.
Yeah. He becomes more mechanical later when he appears in, I believe it was Steve Dillon's art and Garth Ennis's run on Punisher Night, or Punisher Max.
Okay.
He comes back in that.
Yeah.
Which was pretty good. Some of the things that are, like I said, we just kind of blew through it real quick, but eventually the good guys did win. They did win, they do. But some of the cool things about it, and if you will get a chance to ever read about it or just check it out. It is very heavily Christian themed, and especially Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I read that. I didn't really catch it, but then when I started reading
the splash
covers,
pages, and more than that, I didn't pay attention until I started researching it. Even though it's in Christmas, it's the story of Easter, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, the birth, the death, and the reborn. And that's why the splash pages really are. You see it when they point it out to you, especially with his mom, the nun, and stuff.
And him in the fetal position and all. Yeah.
You did see a sequel came out, written by Miller, called Last Rites, which it was a complete role reversal.
Yeah, where he takes down Kingpin.
He essentially copied the pattern that Kingpin did, and he took Kingpin down that way. Even at the end of the final panel, Kingpin utters the words "born again" in it. So overall, it was your first time reading it, right?
Yes.
It was my second time reading it. I remember only reading it once.
Yeah.
So what did you think?
I thought it was... It was very much a tale of two books. At the very beginning, or two stories. At the very beginning, the first 2 or 3 issues. I was like, man, this is heavy and very, very dark. I can't imagine kids, in 1986, 9-10-year-olds reading that.
Yeah.
Well, I want the next one, but it had to be targeted for the older audience. Obviously, with Frank Miller behind the wheel, but by the end it was back to traditional comic, and I liked the darkness, but I'm a little bit older, and it just kind of threw me for a loop. I thought everything in the 80s and 90s was goofy and ridiculous.
Well, it was my second time reading it, and I got to tell you, it's been probably 20 years in between reading it.
Really?
And because it was, like I said, around 96, 97 is when I really dove in to get all the books out of the quote-unquote great series I never read. Yeah. That's when I went back and bought them, and they were still relatively affordable at the time. I liked it more this time.
Yeah.
And because I'm older,
appreciate it more.
I'm older. I appreciate for what he was doing, especially. Yeah. Where do you think, in terms of, I don't know how much Daredevil, I don't think we've ever really talked a lot of Daredevil, but where does it rank as far as Daredevil stories for you?
I think it's got to be up there in number 1. And the reason I say that is because I've always known who Daredevil was, and my first real introduction to him was the terrible Ben Affleck movie. But then after that, when you and I first met, you let me borrow Bendis's run on it.
And that is Bendis's into Brubaker's run. I still rank it at the top. But if I were to give it, we usually judge stuff on a 6-point scale because we were a drinking podcast on our other one. But let's go ahead so we'll stick with that scale. If I consider Brubaker and Bendis's combined run a 6, this is like a 5.85.
Yeah, I think that this would be the way I look at it after reading this is I think Bendis and Brubaker did a remake of Frank Miller's story to a degree where Matt is beaten
it's
down.
He's outed again. And
they did a better job and were able to draw out more of a story over a longer run in a bigger audience. But so I would say that it gets a little bit higher, like 5.8, 5.9, because it inspired basically Daredevil is still the same basic character that is drawn in these pages right here.
He is a character that is evolved in the character part, but not the superhero side of it.
Yeah,
he's the same guy.
And the stuff that Frank Miller did in the 80s and the 90s, what's the issues that he did after this where where it kind of shows him coming up with Stick and training him.
He did one, The Man Without Fear.
Yes, that was
miniseries.
it.
That was my first. That's what made me go back and read his other stuff because I was in high school and going to a gas station, a truck stop that just happened to have comic books.
Yeah.
And that was like where it was extra hard to try to get a comic series, like a run each month.
Yeah, collecting it every month.
But I got those 4, and I made a point to go check it every once a week till the next one came out. And that was a cool cover, at the time. Great story.
But these, that's where if you've watched the show on Netflix, which I highly recommend and very much enjoy, that's basically Frank Miller's storyline. That's, a little bit of this here, Born Again, and then the
Man Without Fear.
Man Without Fear is basically him starting and getting his feet underneath him. So I would say this is definitely the most iconic version of Daredevil.
And Frank Miller definitely is the guy that created the Daredevil that we know and enjoy today. For those that do enjoy Daredevil,
it's crazy to think that in 30 years he's had multiple ups and downs, but it's always the basic same characters that he established in this book.
So, will you think you'll ever go back and read it again?
Yeah, actually, I downloaded the stuff before it, the early '80s stuff.
Yeah,
and then I'm gonna go back and read
his first run on it.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna go back and read the Elektra stuff because I'm kind of curious. What I was reading last night about the Elektra stuff is
Elektra nachos.
Yeah, this is a little more serious and hardcore and grounded in reality to a degree, and the Elektra stuff is over the top with cyborg ninjas and shit.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And the hand that they raise from the dead all the time.
The Hand is still my favorite set of villains.
Really? Of all the villains?
I think it's cool. Like, as an organization, I think it's cool.
Well, then, that 1986 was important because thank you, Frank Miller, for coming up with some stuff. Hey, let's jump to the next book.
Okay.
And I kind of did these in order of the importance to me, which these next two, you can almost flip-flop them.
Okay.
But we're going to go ahead and go to The Watchmen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
If I had to guess, if I was a betting man, I would have said you would have went the other way around.
And I really argued over it as I was laying out the script for this. And so, obviously, everyone, we're not going to break down the story as much as we did Daredevil, because I believe more people, Born Again, although it's great, I got a feeling there's a lot of comic guys out there that haven't, comic guys that we know that have not read it. So this next one, even if you haven't read it, you've seen the film, you know of it, and that is, and more importantly, if a young kids today, Watchmen's more important now than it has been before, but we're going to talk about it. So writer, of course, it was written by Alan Moore, art by Dave Gibbons. We've already talked about Alan Moore and Superman. Alan Moore is by far one of my favorite writers. Alan Moore, Frank Miller, it's hard for me to pick any two writers I like more than them.
Yeah, J. Michael Straczynski. I don't know if I like him more, but Straczynski. But
his body of work is just way smaller.
Yeah, and all those guys that came after him are inspired by the stuff that Moore and Miller did. So this is something I did not know until doing the research. Of course, it ran from 86 to 87, but the actual first appearance was not Watchmen #1. It was DC Spotlight 50th Anniversary Special in 85. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't catch that.
And Alan Moore wrote a short in there about the Watchmen, and that spun off to this. So the book essentially, without getting too much into detail like we just did, it's an alternate reality closely resembling what the 80s were at the time, early 80s specifically, what he wrote. Essentially, I mean, the story kind of diverts from Nixon on.
Yeah, so it's set in 1985, where heroes have been around for 40 years, and they've injected themselves into world events.
Vietnam.
Like, we win Vietnam. America wins. The Watergate thing never happens. Different stuff like that. There's government-funded superheroes. So if you like the Incredibles...
Yes.
This is like Incredibles dark.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's funny, though, that you said superheroes have been around for 40 years.
Yeah.
Did you, I mean, if you think about it, and I knew
in this universe, they've been around.
There's literally only one character in the entire series that has superpowers. Just one. And that's Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, and I was wondering that because I've read this, and then I watched the movie, and the movie's the thing I saw most recently.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, I rewatched it again a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's not bad.
Hey,
it's just kind of slow.
It's just Zack Snyder up there, Zack Snydering it up. Only he's got a little more color in this than his other films.
Yeah,
so.
and the thing is, like, I couldn't tell if they had superpowers or not because, like, when Spectre and Night Owl are fighting in the
they're the peak of human perfection.
Yeah, they are just fucking crushing
now in
dudes.
the comic, it's not as exaggerated.
Exactly.
Only Ozymandias is because he has learned. Because he's so smart.
Well, I looked it up, and he has the ability to use 100% of his brain,
right?
Which also seems very 80s.
Yeah, very. And there's what's a recent movie that did that? Lucy or something with Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, it was Lucy, and it's like you get to use 110% of your brain.
Which, by the way, we use 100% of our brain all the time, just not all at once.
Yeah, and that's just lazy writing,
right? So Ozymandias. To his credit, he used what science was thinking at the time.
Yeah, he's the smartest man on the planet, and which also makes him, peak physicality as well.
Yeah, he learns to make himself physical, and that's the thing too is he is so smart. He's beyond Batman smart, which is the judge for how smart anyone is. That he outsmarts essentially a deity, a god in Dr. Manhattan, and that's the whole story is about. Cold War paranoia.
Yeah.
They don't. The superheroes kind of disappear to where Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias are really the only two that's in the light.
And Dr. Manhattan is a government nuclear deterrent. He basically works for America and keeps everybody else's all the other nuclear powers. Because we
have him, no one else will use their weapons.
It's mutually assured destruction. And Ozymandias is a corporate businessman.
He's a billionaire.
Yeah, he's a corporate billionaire.
He's used his smarts to quote unquote better the planet.
Yeah.
Which is what the story's about. Yeah. And at this point, if there's a spoiler warning, come on, man. The movie, everything's been out a long time.
Yeah, the ending is slightly different by one's an alien attack.
So in the book, Ozymandias creates this huge plan, and by the time Manhattan is privy to it because it directly affects him.
Yeah.
So because he sees all times at once, but only what affects him.
Yeah.
So once he's brought into the story, he realizes the beauty of his plan, and so Ozymandias creates an alien that explodes upon touching ground on Earth, wiping out New York City.
Yeah.
And it creates the whole world unites so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And to go back to Ozymandias' plan, what made it so genius is he faked an attempt on his life, and then he also gave Dr. Manhattan's first wife, before he had his superpowers, cancer to distract Dr. Manhattan and to discredit him as
multiple people that were in his life important to him were dying of cancer that he did.
And he caused Dr. Manhattan to become disillusioned with his job and his role as protector of the United States and government shield. And he left and went to Mars, basically allowing him to execute his plan.
Yeah, because if he's not on the planet, then he's not involved in the timeline. And the other thing, the only person he can trick was a nut job named Rorschach. Yeah. And Rorschach is probably my favorite character in it. Yeah. I think a lot of people probably felt that way too at the time, and played perfectly in a movie that's okay. Played perfectly by Jackie Earle Haley.
Yeah, the guy who was
Kelly.
Yeah, the bad kid in A Christmas Story.
And
he's got yellow eyes.
That wasn't him.
It's not?
No, it's not him.
Is that a legend then?
It's not him at all, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was.
That kid grew up.
I read that online. See, you can't believe everything on the internet.
Yeah, that kid that was the bad kid in Christmas Story grew up to be, he's been a bad guy in movies here and there, and he was Freddy versus Jason, which we happened to sit down and watch last night.
Really?
He was the big brother that committed suicide that spawned the whole town to start covering up Freddy in that version of it. So, no, Jackie Earle Haley grew up to be he was... I
thought he was the kid in A Christmas Story.
No, he was Bad News Bears.
Oh, okay.
That was him. So anyway, the story is... Here's the only thing that I will admit I don't think I've ever admitted this out loud. I did not read the Tales of the Black Freighter.
You know, when I was reading this, I started reading the Tales of the Black Freighter, and it was very, very interesting. But then it's not.
Here's what you get with Alan Moore. He did this in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and you see him starting it here. He is so good at world crafting that there's a story within the story of a kid reading his favorite comic, Tales of the Black Freighter, in this universe.
Yeah,
and so he's essentially got 2 series going. But he claims that the series mimics some things going, and it does. I mean, if you read the summaries of them, it kind of mimics what's going on in the issue. But sometimes the symbolism is very, very broad.
Yeah.
You have to really look to see where it's connecting.
And the other thing is, and I thought I read last night, is the reason that it's a pirate story is because this is set in a world where heroes have been around for 40 years plus. So that's played out.
So comic books are historical.
Historical or, old fantasies of swashbuckling.
Yeah,
and things
the stuff
like
that your kids liked in the 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. This comic book, though, I mean, there is unbelievable praise on this book. I mean, if you can look at a list of the next 2 comics we're going to talk about, the 110, the top 10, the top 5, the top 3, whatever, greatest comic series of all time, Watchmen on half the list is going to come in at number 1.
Yeah, and it's what is it? It's in the top 100 American
English written novels. And it's more important now that DC is redoing things like the multiverse and stuff, and apparently Dr. Manhattan who is behind everything.
Oh, really?
So Rorschach has finally met Batman.
Oh, that's
in
cool.
The comic, and the current relaunch for DC has been spawned by Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, and
Batman is the first person to find out, and he's been going around trying to convince people. And Barry Allen Wally West comes back. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, I've read some here and there, and it's cleaning up all that awfulness that 52 ended on.
Yeah,
and New 52, I should say. So here's the thing, though. Alan Moore, it was also the end of this was the beginning of the end for Alan Moore in DC Comics.
Okay.
He is not a fan of and the fact that they did anything again they did a sequel to it a few years ago. Now this just makes them hate mainstream more than ever.
Yeah. I thought I read that Alan Moore had a hand in what they did this most recent relaunch in 2016-17. Before the Watchmen. I think it's like
the one before the one that they did.
Before Watchmen.
Yeah, I thought I read that he just hates everything about it, and he didn't want anything to do about it.
Is it Alan Moore that also has like his own religion or whatever?
He's got a big old. Well, Grant Morrison also is. He's a warlock.
That's it.
And Alan Moore is caveman warlock guy, and he looks like a whiskey rattled drunk homeless man. But he's also maybe the greatest comic book writer of all time.
Yeah. So. When you read his stuff and then you see a picture of him, you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So okay. So let's get into that. How many times have you ever read The Watchmen?
Twice.
Okay.
I've probably watched the movie twice.
I've read The Watchmen. I've got the by far the definitive edition of both Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns that we're about to talk about. The absolute editions from DC are the ones to get. I've probably read that itself 2-3 times. My roommates in college bought me the miniseries, all bound to bought the series single issues. They just happen to have them, like some comic stores will take a key issues, book them together, give you a $20 price tag on it or something.
Yeah.
They bought me that for Christmas. I probably read those guys. I still have them, but I probably read those maybe 10, 15 times.
Really?
I bet all in I've read this book 20 times.
Now, in the single issues that were bound together is the pirate comic
Tales
in there
of the Black
as well?
Freighter? Yeah.
Really?
It was at the end of every book.
Okay.
Yeah, so it...
and a lot of times when writers do that, I tend to skip that stuff too, because I'm just like...
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I mentioned League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that Alan Moore wrote. I've read... The first one, I was an unbelievable fan of it. The second one, The Black Dossier... He gets so wordy sometimes.
He does.
Sometimes, and I don't mind some analytical and some heavy thinking comics and some really complex stories, but it's still a comic book.
Black Dossier is hard to read. His stuff his standalone Nemo stuff is very good.
I've never read that, so I'll have to check that out. So, but where does this rank all time to you, and where do you think Yeah, just to you, where does this rank all time in comic book history?
Well, I mean, it's got to be up. It's so inspiring. So, I mean, even if I think it's just a pretty good story, I think the ending is spectacular. What I like about the ending is how dark and logical it all is.
Yeah.
So as far as a story, it's a 10 or a 6 out of 5. As far as like where it ranks for me in comic book history, 4.
I'm going to go ahead and say it's hard for me to place 1 and 2 because it's 2 books we're talking to from 1986.
Yeah.
I have a couple other books that I was going to talk to about, but since we're going to do this for a while, we'll get it when they pop up. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to go ahead and since I put it second on this, I'm calling it the second best series of all time.
Okay.
And
I mean, I can't argue with you. I don't think you're wrong.
so to me, that's going to lead us into what I consider the greatest comic book miniseries of all time. And I'm going to call it miniseries, and I'm going to call that a miniseries, even though it's a maxi series, because some of the other stuff, like, you know, there's multiple issues that make it great. For instance, Preacher Planetary, those were 60 plus issues. You know, and so that doesn't, I mean, they're 2 separate categories to me. But just in terms of literary comic work, these are 2 and 1. And that leads us to number 1, which I consider arguably the most important comic series of all time, just barely ahead of Watchmen. And that is The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
Written by Frank Miller, art by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. Came out in 1986. So Dick Giordano was appointed the editorial director of DC in the early 80s.
Okay.
One of the things that because before he was appointed editorial director, he was in charge of the Batman titles. One of the things that he wanted to fix was the fact that even though here we are in the mid to late 80s, and Batman is still associated with the TV show from the 60s because it was ungodly in syndication, it's still.
Yeah.
So people, even though the 70s had some darker stuff, they would not get away from associating it with the campy boom pow stuff and the Adam West. Not that there's anything wrong with Adam West. It's classic.
Yeah.
But so he recruited Frank Miller. This is fresh off Jim Starlin's run on Death in the Family.
Okay.
So Jason Todd had just died.
Yeah.
So supposedly Giordano and Frank Miller got together and they wrote or came up with the story. And apparently the draft that we read today and then is the 4th or 5th version of the book they came up with. So some notes on it before we get going, because we're not going to break this story down about like we did last time.
Okay.
This was the first time we saw a girl Robin.
That was the thing I wrote down.
That was big. Carrie Kelly. Apparently that was suggested by John Byrne.
Okay.
He suggested and Miller agreed. This is the definitive showdown between Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
The definitive.
Now, and I'm confusing. They fought before. Like, Man of Steel is inspired by a different Batman versus Superman battle, or is it inspired by this?
No, Dawn of Justice?
The movie.
Yeah. Well, we'll call it Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice / The Birth.
Is that inspired by this movie, or is that a different battle?
No, that's this.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's
I was like, man, I thought they fought.
The big robot outfit. They've had a tussle a couple times, but this is the one.
Yeah.
This is the big one. So... That said, it's a 55-year-old Bruce Wayne. The whole point of the story is he's been in seclusion. He's been hidden since the death of Jason Todd. He comes out to wear the mask again, to put on the mantle of the bat, the cowl. He puts the cowl cap, he unretires, and along the way he fights a mutant gang, which is some of what Frank Miller's known for, creating his own weird slang.
Yeah, the goofy stuff that don't make sense. Like, there's no explanation really for the mutants. Are they mutants? Are they superpowered people?
And the way they talk, you get it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to slag him. And that's a Frank Miller signature. He fights the Gotham police. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the Superman. Arguably if it wasn't for... the most current Batman run with Scott Snyder's run. Yeah. This probably would have been the most famous Joker run, but I think Scott Snyder's run is that much better.
Yeah, but Joker breaking his own back.
Because breaks his own neck.
Yeah, I read back.
Is it? Well, maybe.
I think it's back. It's been a couple years, so I had to reread the synopsis.
Because Batman doesn't have the guts to do it.
Yeah.
He goes, even after all is said and done, you still don't have the guts to do it.
Harvey Dent going full Two-Face.
No longer Two-Face, a One-Face.
Yeah.
Which was a great twist that it just made him crazier. Apparently, much of the story was inspired by Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry, and more importantly, it was Sudden Impact.
Okay.
was the one. Now, this is something I didn't realize at the time, too. This was a $2.95 cover price.
In the 80s?
The average price of a comic was between 65 and 75 cents,
Wow.
and this was $2.95.
Maybe it was done on purpose to weed out the little kids.
It's exactly what it said. They even labeled it as a complex adult or a complex dark superhero action story, and they put that price tag on there to essentially creating this prestige format comic, which DC was ahead of the game on that. They did Elseworlds and all that stuff, but. Yeah. Another cool note I got. So Vincent Conair,
Okay.
he created the Comic Sans font for your computer, so all your hate can be sent to his estate if he's still alive.
Find him on Twitter.
He claimed that it was inspired by Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns.
Really?
That's why he created the Comic Sans font. And let's get into the story a little bit, then we'll get into some other things too.
Okay.
You know, again, there's I will tell you, I finally did it over the years, but it was a long time before I went back and reread all the news art parts of it.
Okay.
Like I would skip through the news, you know, because how every book is framed with with the news stories.
The 80s, they were just so damn wordy.
They were. But I get it. I get the way the news was.
Well, it sets up the scene.
Yeah, and that's the way news was very much back then. People were starting to get more into style and fashion.
Yeah.
And you know,
the other thing that was a note that, you know, when we were talking about the 80s was that was the launch of, I think it's 86 is when 85 or 86 is when CNN launched.
Oh, man, look what, I wonder if they launched all back in the day, if they would have been proud of how news outlets have turned today.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, the things my biggest takeaways from this was not just that it was a girl Robin, but it was awesome that she used a slingshot.
Yep.
But I think Superman Batman fight aside, are including my favorite thing about this whole book was the fight with the leader of the mutants.
Yeah, because he gets his ass handed to him the first time.
Yeah, he gets his ass beat badly,
which is cool because, you know, he's 10 years in retirement, he's out of shape.
But it's Batman's narration that makes this book so good. He knows why he loses.
Yeah,
he analyzed it. He thought about it.
And it's very Batman.
Yeah, and then it's good that you said that. It's very Batman from this book on.
Yeah.
And when he faces him in the mud pit and takes him systematically, like he said, he goes, "No, you think I'm in here with it, but this is my operating room, and I'm a surgeon."
Yeah.
And he takes him apart. And that's another thing. When he first shows back up at the beginning of it, it's awesome when he goes, "There are 13 different ways of taking this man down. 6 are lethal, 5 would paralyze him, 2 hurt."
Yeah.
And then he takes him down. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I like how at the end he basically turns like half the mutants into they're just blind followers who become like
the police and the mutants.
Yeah,
he gets them all. They're all Batmans.
And then the thing, you know, Superman's a government shill. Who,
again, you know, very big themes.
Yeah, there's a lot of government, and that's why I went and after this was all done, after reading this and, you know, catching up on the synopsis of Watchmen and rechecking it out, I'm like, man, this was all very heavy government.
And that is a good point. After we've hit on them both, all that stuff you brought up that was outside 86 is a good point. People did not trust the government.
No.
And maybe more or less it wasn't that they didn't trust them, but I think people become more self-aware of how dangerous and world-leveling the government can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and, you know, obviously, some other notes of it. And we're going to get into that here in a second. The one-armed Green Arrow.
Yeah, and that's the only iteration of Green Arrow that I know. Because besides that, in the TV show, I've never.
Oh, you never read Quiver from Kevin Smith? That's a good one. I'll have to let you borrow that. I got it somewhere, or I've read it. Used to have it. We'll find it, but. Okay. Yeah, but the Superman, the way he took Superman out, hitting him with the nuclear blast to weaken him, and then having the powered suit and the kryptonite.
And he could have killed him, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
There's so many great, like I said, the reason, and here's why I think this is the greatest comic book of all time, because arguably Batman is the most popular superhero of all time.
Yeah. Him and Spider-Man.
Marvel's done a good job of catching up and closing the gap, but there was a significant amount of time where it was Batman.
Yep.
And that's thanks to Tim Burton and, you know, unfortunately Joe Schumacher and those guys tried to murder it. But
and then the cartoon in the 90s.
The greatest animated show of all time.
Yeah.
The Batman, the animated series.
I'd even go Batman. What's the future one? Batman.
Batman Beyond. Very good comic book.
It's in a very good cartoon.
I mean, movie. That's why I comic book. And the movie, by the way, The Return of the Joker is worth watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so here. So that said, that's why I think this is the greatest. But here's some of the other influences it had. So outside of obviously BVS DOJ. We're going to abbreviate because that's the longest named movie of all time.
Yeah, it also sucks.
Yeah, it also is awful. The Dark Knight Return is referenced in the new Batman Adventures, and I'd forgot that this wasn't in the animated series, but it was the follow-up, the new Batman Adventures. They did a story called Tales of the Dark Knight, and it was told like it's 3 or 4 kids running through the street, and they're telling stories that they heard about Batman, and it's all a bit of a homage to different Batman, and one of them is the mutant battle.
Okay.
And it's awesome.
That's cool.
It also one kid goes, well, I heard Batman has bad guys that skate around on skates and and this kid has a boa and he's got crazy sunglasses, and the other kids look at him and say, shut up, Joel. So the best
fucking great.
Inside baseball of all time. So Teen Titans cartoon.
Yeah.
Not the campy one that is actually awesome, but the one
entertaining.
But the one that was a real try to take on it. At one point in that series, Beast Boy is captured and locked in a cage, and 2 people that look exactly like the mutants are throwing things at him and speaking in weird slang.
Oh, really?
Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and the Batman. We won't talk about those because those sucked, but they have their little bit of tip of the hat to him. I didn't know this one. Girl Meets World. The sequel to Boy Meets World?
Yeah. I didn't watch it, but yes.
New teacher comes into the school, English teacher, and he gives them copies of Dark Knight Returns to read as homework, and they're going to dissect it. And it's the whole theme of the episode is what is allowable in schools, and him and the principal have to get in a battle over whether or not this is the proper education for your kid. Yeah, so I thought that was big.
Yeah, that's awesome.
As I said earlier, in the Batman Dark Knight Returns, Arrow is older with a goatee and is missing his left arm. Well, in Legends of Tomorrow, the future version of Arrow, Stephen Amell, does that look.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so no arm and a goatee.
And then I was going to say in the last Dark Knight or what's the last?
Dark Knight Rises is the last one.
Yeah, the last one. When he fakes his death and kind of... he kind of off. I think it was a little bit of a
it definitely was
nod and a tip of the hat to some of these stories.
And then Gotham has done something, but I don't watch Gotham, so I can't speak on how it went very well.
I didn't watch anything past season 1.
There were a couple forgettable sequels in 2001 and 2015, but if we ever want to cover those, we'll wait till we do those years.
Sure, if somebody asks.
But again, just ungodly influenced. So did you have? Let's go to my questions that my standard questions. So, what did you think? How many times have you ever reread it, and where does it rank?
I've read it 3 times. I would say, besides Scott Snyder's run, this is a spectacular. This is second best run.
So here's my take on it. This is the single best enclosed Batman story.
Yeah, it's 4 issues, right?
Scott Snyder's run is the single greatest run in the history of Batman, and that's taking into account the regular issues that Frank Miller would later do and Starlin and all these guys. Court of Owls is a second in terms of to me. Court of Owls is very good.
Yeah, and the fact that this is only 4 issues and they shoved so much content in storyline arc, and they bring in Superman in and government overreach and everything the 80s was really good at shoving a bunch of stuff into one contained story and it coming out great and not feeling
we didn't have all these we did have epic crossovers like Crisis and things like that in Secret War, but they were more contained than they are now. Where did you think it ranks? I've already kind of laid in on where I think it ranks.
I think it's the second best Batman ever.
Behind Snyder's?
Yeah.
For those that don't know, and we're not going to get into that year unless it ever comes up, Scott Snyder really had just wrapped up.
Yeah.
Just a very long and very epic run on Batman.
Yeah.
So that's the 3 comics. We're going to wrap up with talking about a couple things. I looked up to try to find sales to what was the best-selling comics in 1986 and stuff, but it wasn't until 1991 that they really started keeping track of all that. So I can't wait till we get into 91 post-era stuff to see I did want to give credit to some of the sources I looked. Some of the sources I used were Comic Book Resources.
Yep.
A very cool website that I just discovered called Comicron, which gives you like where I got the average prices. It's got the sales all broken down. Pretty cool website. I used Wikipedia, obviously, IGN. But just throw into your Googles and look up 1996 in comics.
86.
Or 1986 in comics. You will get Vulture magazine, Rolling Stone magazine. You will get some of the best articles.
And you'll get a ton of articles on people, inspired by it, going into it. One of the other things that I thought was a comic that I had never read and I never would have, but after reading this I thought was pretty interesting was this comic called Maus.
Oh yeah,
the Holocaust.
I can't believe I left that out. Speaking of literary acclaim, Maus has won every award.
So it's spelled. It is mouse.
Yeah, and it's a mouse is what it is.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's basically it's one family struggle during the Holocaust, where the Jews are mice and the Nazis are cats. And I'm gonna go back and read that because it looks pretty awesome.
Here's
and
something
it won a
I didn't
Pulitzer.
know. Yeah, it did. And here's something I did not know, by the way. The one that won the first one, the one that came out in '86, that was not the first appearance of that book. It collected the stories. It collected where it was a series of stories that he had done. So it was a collected book, but it was, and then the sequel to it won ungodly amounts of it. And like we talked about earlier. So there, Watchmen, Dark Knight, and Maus, and there's a good argument to be made that might be the most critically acclaimed comic book of all time.
Maus?
Yeah. And it's in the vault. I
want to read it, and
I read it once.
It's got crazy weird art. It's very French.
I read it once because you have to, and I get the beauty of it. But it's not a superhero comic.
Yeah, no,
and
no,
I don't need superhero
all.
comics, but it's not even close. It doesn't even resemble that. So
yeah, no, it would.
You got to know what you're getting into. And
I would put it on.
When I was 19 years old, I did not know what I was getting into. So I might go back and read it now. Maybe it'll have.
I think I'd appreciate it more. There's a similar one that does the Civil Rights March, John Lewis's story.
Oh, he wrote that.
Yeah, called March. It's called March. It's a 3 thing.
And it won an award. And to my knowledge, and you can look me up and check me, it's probably the only comic ever written by a senator.
I would probably guess so. Could be wrong. One of the other things that I thought was pretty crazy I had never heard of, Steel Dragon Press created Captain Confederacy.
I did not know that.
And I was so I started to dig into it, and it's set in an alternate history and was written by Will Shirtley and Vince Stone. First published in '86, ran from reviewed in '91. Either way, so it's set in this alternate universe where there's a Captain America kind of guy named Captain Confederacy, and he runs a TV show and basically holds up everything the Confederacy stands for and fights black bad guys. But they give him all real superpowers for the TV show, and he becomes disheartened with his character after his friend, who is the bad guy on the show, is killed by the government. So then he switches and starts to take down the Confederacy that he stood for.
So it does have a good ending.
Yeah, it has a good ending. So I was reading into it, and I'm like, this seems kind of crazy.
Very 86.
It's very 80s and very weird.
So that's another thing. The independent press was very much alive and even in full bore because it birthed things like Kitchen Sink Press was already going, but it birthed the Dark Horses and stuff. It was the first time. Now that we would later know that Dark Horse is now not just it's still number 4, but it's a healthy number 4.
Yeah.
And
Dark Horses came a long way. If you go back and look at the titles some of the ones you mentioned in the beginning, like they're goofy titles. It's like dudes sitting in their basement writing comics and they're just getting pushed out.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but it was like the people that Dark Horse, and I could be wrong here, but I think they're a comic book store first.
Really?
And to this day, their headquarters still has the comic book store attached to it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to go there.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So that said, any last thoughts on it other than we'll get into what maybe we'll do next month?
I don't think I had a really good time with this. This had to be one of the most exciting things to research and have fun with.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to do. It forces us to read some stuff that we probably missed.
Or stuff that is always on that list of like, I'm going to get around to reading that and then never do.
So we're going to give ourselves a week. I wrote down, I know you talked about, you might have had some options, but as I was scribbling down today, I put, 3 possible years. 1992, first year of Image. I don't want to do that yet. I want to save that.
Okay.
because I don't want to blow my load too bad, because that's arguably one of the biggest things that influenced my comic books.
Okay.
I mean, I was a freshman in high school when that happened. 2004 I thought would be an interesting year because...
Is that Civil War?
Well, Marvel came out with its Icon imprint, its first created own imprint.
Yes. Oh, Powers. Yeah.
Yes. And more importantly than that, The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger and Iron Man were in theaters. And
was that 8? No, Iron Man's 2008.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure it's 2008.
I could have... Well, let's look it up. We'll look it up.
Either way. Anyways, 2004.
I got to look real quick while we talk. This is a... Well, here is... Oh, no, you're right. It is 2004. So what was it that I read?
2008.
2008. So what was 2004? There was a movie I saw in 2000. So there were some...
Either way.
There was movies were starting to impact comics more.
Yeah.
I thought that'd be an interesting year.
That's probably Spider-Man 2.
Maybe that's what it was. And then the other year I put down, and because this is a year that I'm going to be interested in years like this too. I picked 2010 because it was the first of a new decade, and nothing really happened.
Okay.
So it's going to cause us to really research and figure out what was fun to read and stuff.
Okay.
And it'll be fun to see if we come up with different things.
I think it's going to be a lot of like crazy image stuff
But that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, we can't read anything. We'll have to pick out what we want.
Yeah. See, my idea was to go back, and so I went back and read some of the Age of Apocalypse. And that was what got me into comics, was Wolverine's Weapon X story of Age of Apocalypse. But there is a lot of garbage in there.
Boy, that you didn't realize how many books tied into that.
Oh my God! There's like 4 compendiums, 300 pages thick. But the Weapon X stuff is pretty good.
So as you listen to that, if you think that, scratch 92 off. Think of 2004, 2010, or a write-in if you can think so. If you want to tweet us, mention it.
Yeah.
I'm going to share this with a lot of comic book people I know and have them try to look at it and listen to it, see what they think, because I want to hear what the people that know think.
Or if there's something that you think that you've read and it's your absolute favorite run, and you want us to talk about it and see what we think about it, do it.
We'll do it. So we're gonna stew in this for a week. We're gonna go ahead next week and pick a month or pick a year.
Okay.
And give ourselves about 3 weeks to figure out what the research, and we're gonna go from there. But that's it, man. This is the episode. This is what we're gonna do every week.
Not quite, because in 2004, Incredibles came out.
Oh, that's worth talking about. Arguably
Spider-Man
the
2. I was correct.
Okay, there you go.
And probably the best of all, Catwoman with Halle Berry.
See, it's a year when movies started really blowing up, and I thought that'd be interesting to talk about. So
that was sad sarcasm, by the way. Catwoman with Halle Berry was awful.
So maybe 2004 might be it. We don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
That said, I know some of you probably were looking for more of the wit and stuff, whatever we call that.
No, I think this was just a geek out episode.
Yeah,
so
and that's what they're going to be once a month.
Maybe put it in the warning, like, hey, this is less comedy, more geeky.
Hey, so this episode was all about 1986, and 1986 was that year in comics that we talked about. So we're done. You guys let us know what you think, and we'll talk to you later.
Yep. Hold on to your butts.
I was wondering if you were going to do it, but I was thinking about not.